When I was growing up in Morocco, there was this narrative in the media that wouldn't die. Africa is backwards, primitive, constantly playing catch up with the rest of the world. Well, spoiler alert, that's complete nonsense. But here is something interesting. When most people hear tech innovation, they picture hoodies and cold brew in San Francisco, not engineers in Lagos or Nairobi. Today, I want to explore why that is and what's actually happening in Africa's rising tech ecosystems. This is personal for me. A few years back, I used my freelancing money to start a small juice bar. My own mother thought I had completely lost my mind, wasting all this studying and all these job opportunities to be essentially making juices. Shortly after, I moved to the UK and built one of the fastest growing brands in the country. I have a team around me, hundreds of thousands of customers. I'm all over Forbes and the BBC at this point. But my mom would still rather tell the neighbors I had a corporate job than admit what I was actually doing, even when I was doing well enough that those same neighbors' kids were coming to me for advice. The experience taught me something about innovation in Africa that statistics don't capture. The social pressure against entrepreneurship is real, and it shapes everything about our tech ecosystems. Because what I discovered after diving into Africa's Silicon Valleys completely changed my perspective. These aren't just imitations of America's tech hub. They're potentially the blueprint for something entirely different, and maybe even better, built by people who had to overcome not just business challenges, but cultural ones too. Africa isn't just catching up in tech in some areas, it's actually leading. 2/3 of all mobile money transactions in the world happen in sub-Saharan Africa. Think about that for a second. The continent that's typically portrayed as needing help is actually pioneering financial technologies that the rest of the world is scrambling to copy. So let's dig into Africa's Silicon Valleys, not just what they are, but how they came to be, and why they might represent a future of tech that solves real problems instead of just creating billion-dollar apps for first-world conveniences. When we talk about Africa's Silicon Valleys, we're not talking about one place. The continent is massive. You could fit the US, China, India, and most of Europe inside it. So naturally, multiple tech hubs have popped up, each with their own specialty. Lagos in Nigeria, or Yabacon Valley, is a fintech powerhouse and home to companies like Flutterwave, valued at around $3 billion. Nairobi in Kenya, the Silicon Savannah, is the birthplace of M-Pesa, the mobile payment system that changed finance when most Kenyans didn't even have bank accounts. Cape Town and Johannesburg in South Africa use the country's more established financial infrastructure to lead in e-commerce and insurtech. Cairo in Egypt is quickly becoming a hotbed for e-commerce, logistics, and AI startups. But then there is Kigali in Rwanda, focusing on drone delivery, clean energy, and agri-tech. Some people even call it the Singapore of Africa. But perhaps the most unexpected is Botswana, which invested $60 million in a science and technology park that's already housing over 100 startups with free broadband and everything they would need. They're literally building a Silicon Valley from scratch in the desert. In 2023, the big four African tech ecosystems attracted some serious funding. Kenya attracted $800 million, Egypt $640 million, South Africa $600 million, Nigeria $410 million. These four countries secured 87% of all startup funding on the continent. So what made these places become centers of innovation? That's where the story gets interesting. Most of us think progress happens in linear stages. You need landlines before mobile phones, brick and mortar banks before digital banking. But Africa challenged this assumption by completely skipping some stages, essentially taking shortcuts. I saw this firsthand growing up. In some parts of Africa, people who never had landline phones suddenly had mobile phones. The most famous example is Kenya's M-Pesa. It launched in 2007, and it allowed people to transfer money via text when most Kenyans had no access to banks. Within a decade, 2/3 of Kenya's adult population was using mobile money. It wasn't copying the West, it was solving a uniquely African problem. Here's what's fascinating about this. When you're not constrained by legacy systems, you can sometimes build something better. Without thousands of bank branches and ATMs, Kenya created a more flexible, accessible financial system than many Western countries had at the time. But let's be real, there are also some serious challenges. Only about 37% of Africans had internet access in 2023, compared to 67% globally. Power outages are common. Over 25% of Nigerian businesses reported double-digit revenue loss due to frequent power cuts. And this creates an interesting dynamic where innovation and frustration exist side by side. A Lagos engineer might be building world-class payment infrastructure while dealing with internet outages and running generators. An entrepreneur in Nairobi might be pitching to Silicon Valley VCs in the morning and figuring out how to distribute their product without reliable logistics networks in the afternoon. But here's where things get better. These constraints don't just limit innovation, they shape it. When I worked in New York, I saw startups competing over who could deliver groceries 1 minute faster. Even to this day, I'm not really interested when I hear a founder pitch me an idea that will get me my clothes delivered 2 minutes faster. But in Africa, tech companies are tackling fundamental problems: access to financial services, healthcare, education, reliable power. Take Zipline in Rwanda. They're using drones to deliver blood and medical supplies to remote hospitals. This isn't a luxury service, it's saving lives in places where roads wash out during rainy seasons and conventional delivery is impossible. Or M-KOPA, which pioneered pay-as-you-go solar systems for homes without electricity. Using mobile payments, families can power their homes without waiting decades for the grid to reach them. These aren't just African versions of Western ideas, they're original solutions to problems that much of the world faces, and increasingly, they're inspiring innovation elsewhere. There is another powerful force driving Africa's tech boom: the diaspora. Africans who studied or worked in places like Silicon Valley, London, or Toronto are returning home, bringing knowledge, connections, and capital with them. Take Flutterwave's founder, Olugbenga Agboola. He worked at PayPal and Google before starting his company in Nigeria. Or Andela's founders who connected African talent with global tech companies. In Lagos, many of the first wave of successful startups like Jumia and Konga were founded by Nigerians who had studied abroad. They saw opportunities to solve local problems with global approaches. But as a society, there is a fascinating tension here. In Silicon Valley, the classic story celebrates failure as a badge of honor. The founder who lived in their car before making it big is practically a trope. In many African contexts, this approach doesn't translate well. The gossip factor is also real. There is this pressure where failing doesn't just reflect on you, it becomes ammunition for community gossip that affects your whole family. It's not just about your business reputation, it's deeply personal. There's also this weird hierarchy thing going on where younger people are expected to wait their turn before leading or starting something big. And then there is the family responsibility. In many African families, once you're earning, you're expected to contribute financially. Taking entrepreneurial risks can be seen as selfish or even irresponsible when your parents or siblings might need your support. The flip side is that when things get tough, those same family networks become your safety net in ways that don't exist in more individualistic societies. These cultural differences profoundly shape how innovation happens, who gets funded, and what success looks like across Africa's tech ecosystems. Talking about funding, in 2022, venture funding in Africa hit record highs, over $6.5 billion. SoftBank made its first major investment in Africa with $400 million into OPay, a Nigerian payment platform. We've gone from 0 unicorns a few years ago to at least half a dozen by 2023. But here's the catch. In 2024, fintech accounts for 60 to 70% of all startup funding in most African countries. While financial inclusion is crucial, this concentration might be limiting innovation in other sectors, and funding remains concentrated in a few hubs. Lagos, Cairo, Nairobi, and Cape Town attract the vast majority of investment, leaving many promising entrepreneurs in other regions struggling to access capital. There's also a question on who's funding Africa's tech future. Chinese investors have backed companies like Kenya's M-Pesa and Nigeria's Flutterwave. Western VCs like Sequoia Capital and Y Combinator are increasingly active, but local venture capital is still growing. This matters because whoever funds the future often shapes it, and ownership is important. That's where the role of governments comes in. Government policy is a make or break factor for tech ecosystems. The success of M-Pesa in Kenya was partly due to regulators taking a light touch, allowing innovation to flourish before imposing heavy regulation. Rwanda ranks highly for ease of doing business and offers startup grants, innovation funds, and regulatory sandboxes to test new ideas. But then you have cases like Nigeria's sudden 2021 cryptocurrency ban through banks, which caught many fintech startups off guard, or the 3-month internet shutdown in Anglophone Cameroon in 2017, which devastated local tech businesses. These policy differences explain why some African tech hubs thrive while others struggle, despite having similar talent pools and market opportunities. I lived and worked in Sao Paulo after spending time in the US and Europe, and it hit me. While Western startups are busy trying to shave a minute off grocery delivery, tech companies in places like Latin America and Africa are solving real problems that actually matter. Africa's innovations aren't just for Africa. Mobile banking in Kenya is changing fintech worldwide. Off-grid power from East Africa is being used in disaster zones. Telemedicine built for rural areas could help underserved communities everywhere. The future of tech isn't another social media app. It's real solutions for clean water, energy, healthcare, and finance. And Africa is leading the way, not in spite of its challenges, but because of them. By 2050, Africa will have the world's largest workforce. We're young, digitally native, and we're growing every day, while many other regions age. This demographic dividend could power decades of innovation, but there are significant hurdles to overcome: infrastructure gaps, political instability in some regions, and ensuring that tech benefits reach beyond the urban centers. The question isn't whether Africa will produce more tech innovation. It will. The questions are, what kind of innovation, who will benefit, and who will own it? Will Africa's tech future be owned by its people, building solutions for local problems, or will it be dominated by foreign tech giants who see the continent primarily as a market to be captured? The answer depends on investment in education, infrastructure, supportive policies, and whether Africa can retain and empower its talent. When I was growing up in Morocco, we were taught to look elsewhere for models of success, to Europe, to America. The idea that Africa could lead global innovation seemed far-fetched. Today, when young entrepreneurs from the continent come to me for advice, I tell them something I wish someone had told me. The path is harder, not just because of infrastructure or funding, but because of those invisible social barriers. You'll have friends who think you've lost your mind. You'll have relatives who'd rather tell neighbors you have a real job than explain your startup. You'll face people who think you're too young or too inexperienced to lead. And some of us have that gorilla they carry on their backs, having to take care of our families. But that's actually becoming our superpower. The entrepreneurs succeeding in Africa's tech hubs aren't just technically brilliant. They're socially resilient in ways their Western counterparts rarely need to be. They've overcome business challenges, but also financial and cultural ones. Africa's Silicon Valleys aren't just copying the American playbook. They're writing a new one, focusing on solving real problems rather than chasing unicorn valuations built by founders who understand both technology and the complex social fabric it needs to serve. The continent that gave the word mobile money might just be showing us what technology should actually be for, not just convenience and entertainment, but addressing fundamental human needs. So next time someone talks about Africa catching up to the West, remember, in many ways, Africa isn't following, it's leading, showing a different path for how tech can serve humanity. So what do you think? Could Africa's approach to tech innovation actually be a better model for the world? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can bring you even more. I'll see you next time.